The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to APS Webinars. The title of today's webinar is Career Self-Advocacy, How I Got a Six-Figure Job in the Private Sector. I'm Crystal Bailey, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. APS Webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. Today's presentation features speaker Meghan Anzelc and moderator Eric Sorty. Meghan will be giving advice on how to prepare for non-academic careers while in graduate school. After Meghan finishes her presentation, the remainder of the program will belong to you for our question and answer session. Because of the number of people attending this webinar, we are only accepting text questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please type it into the questions panel located on the right side of your screen. You may submit questions through the questions panel at any time during the webinar, and we will answer all of your questions at the end. We will do our best to cover all the questions you submit, but we do apologize if we're unable to cover everything. Finally, a link to the recording of today's presentation will be emailed to you after today's event and will also be made available on the APS website on this webinar's main page. We do ask that you please allow 24 hours for video upload before trying to access the video. And so with that, let's get started. Moderating the discussion today will be Eric Sorty. Eric is currently a postdoctoral researcher at Washington University in St. Louis, working on complex metal hydrides for hydrogen storage. Eric earned a BA in Finance and BS in Physics from the University of Utah, and after briefly working in cosmic ray physics, finished his PhD in atomic and molecular physics in 2011. Eric has formerly served on the Executive Committee for the Forum on Graduate Student Affairs and is currently serving as counselor for the American Physical Society. And with that, Eric, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Crystal. So today we have Meghan Anzelc joining us to talk about resources to help you educate yourself about non-academic careers while in graduate school. Meghan Anzelc is a director of predictive modeling at CNA and is responsible for building and maintaining predictive pricing models for commercial auto and small businesses. Prior to joining CNA in 2011, Meghan worked at Travelers in a predictive modeling role in personal insurance. Meghan holds a bachelor's degree in physics from Loyola University, Chicago, and a master's and PhD in physics from Northwestern. She's also been involved in gender equality initiatives for over a decade, including co-founding and co-chairing the Women in Actuarial and Analytics group, the first diversity business network at Travelers. In July, Meghan also ran her first half marathon, raising thousands of dollars for a cancer society. So with that, we'd like to hear Meghan's presentation. I'll turn the time over to you, Meghan.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here talking to you today. So I've got a few slides, and as Crystal said, please keep your questions coming in, and we'll be happy to talk things through at the end. So I do work in the corporate world, so I do have a disclaimer that these views are mine and not those of my employer. And a little bit about me. So as Eric said, I have my PhD from Northwestern. I did my dissertation work at Fermilab in the Chicago area in high-energy particle physics. And my first job after grad school, as Eric mentioned, was working at Travelers Insurance, the big red umbrella. I started in a consultant role in predictive modeling, and then my current job, I'm in a director role in a very similar role, but at CNA Insurance in Chicago. And so what this really means, so what I do today is that I have a team of people that work under me who are the people who develop the pricing algorithms using predictive modeling techniques. So essentially what we do is we try to figure out what your premium should be, how much we should charge you for insurance coverage based on what we know about you. Because what we want to do is to predict how many losses you will have in your policy term and then set your price accordingly. So that's what that actually means. So why am I working in the corporate world and why not academia? Before I started graduate school, when I was an undergrad, I really enjoyed research internships. I had 3 over 3 different summers. And I really liked those. And I wanted to do more research, and it seemed to me like the best way to do a really deep, in-depth research project was to go for a PhD. So that's what I did. And during graduate school, which I enjoyed what I did and I enjoyed the work, I found that things were different than what I had anticipated, which I think all of us can probably relate to. But there was a hiring freeze at Fermilab. There weren't a lot of people who were in real true research positions. Pretty much everybody I knew was either a postdoc, or if they were a professor, they had both teaching and research responsibilities. And I really wasn't interested in being a university professor. I didn't really have an interest in that formal teaching. But I do really enjoy the informal and one-on-one stuff. And so I started thinking about what else I could do after I graduated. So I didn't want to be a professor. It didn't seem like there was going to be a research job after graduate school at the lab. So I started thinking about what else could I do. And then, oops, slide issues. Okay, so the first thing I did was to try to figure out what other people had done. So some statistics that hopefully you guys have seen, but you may not have. There's about 1,500 physics PhDs a year, but only a few hundred faculty jobs every year. And I've got some links at the bottom to the AIP statistics. If that's news to you, go check out their statistics. It's worth understanding kind of the reality of the job market. So that tells you that the overwhelming majority of people with PhDs in physics don't stay in academia. So I figured, well, at least some of them had to have been successful. Some of them had to have careers that they were happy with. So I tried to find some of those people. So the first thing was my own personal network, but that was pretty much all other academic physicists. And I did a lot of research online, and I really had a hard time finding things. There's more stuff today than there was when I was looking, but it just felt like there wasn't a lot out there. So what I started doing was finding people who had jobs who were physicists, either masters or PhDs, who had gone and done something outside of academia and did informational interviews with them, basically half-an-hour phone call type thing. Ask them about what they did, what they enjoyed, what was challenging, what they would do differently, things like that. And so I actually was a member of the Forum on Graduate Student Affairs at the time, and I kind of took this on as a project for them. And those interviews are still out there today on the FGSA website. And there's, I think, about a dozen or so. There's, somebody that worked at a science museum and designed science exhibits, somebody that worked as a quant trader for a proprietary trading firm on Wall Street, somebody that worked for Caterpillar their whole life, a really wide range of things. And so the way that I found these people, some was through the APS directory, which is a great resource because you can pretty easily tell if their employer is listed as something other than a university, then they're probably working in the private sector somewhere. I looked at alumni directories, so both Northwestern and Loyola and some others, and then just did some searching online. I actually found, as I was preparing for this talk, that one of the people I had done an informational interview with when I was job searching, I actually found through LinkedIn by looking at alumni from my universities as a way to kind of make an introduction that, hey, we have something in common. Would you mind spending a few minutes talking to me about what you do? So that's what I was working on when I was still in grad school, just trying to see what was out there and what people had done. And then I had also done some grant applications. So there's a number of opportunities out there for supplemental funding on top of the stipends you're already receiving. And essentially, I'll just be frank, I was tired of making very little money. And so I was trying to find something. I figured this was a way for me to make a little bit more money without taking on a whole additional job. And I actually was lucky enough to be awarded one of them from the Armed Forces Communications and Electronics Association. The guy who heads the fellowship area became kind of a mentor to me and was somebody who I talked to through my job search, and he helped kind of connect me to some people and had some ideas and things like that. So that was step one. And some of those people, I should say, too, I'm still in touch with. So if you go out to the FGSA website and you see those interviews and you see somebody on there that you're interested in talking with, you feel free to contact me and I can try to get you in touch. All right. So after that, I think it's really important to give some thought to what you want to do. And so these were some of the questions that I kind of asked myself and thought through, and I still do today when I'm thinking about my next step in my career. So what are the things I'm really good at? What are the things that people talk about? When they talk about me, what are the common themes in terms of what I'm good at and what they see as my strengths? What are the things I really enjoy doing? Like I said, I really like the research part of things. I wasn't so crazy about the teaching part of things. What do I dislike? What do I not have an interest in? And that it doesn't necessarily need to be what you do, but it can also be the people you work with, the type of environment you work with, things like that. There are some people I worked with, and you probably know some as well, who would never work in a place where they had to wear a tie, right? That's just not them. And that's okay, but it's important to think about that and think about what are you comfortable with, what are you not, where do you want to draw some of those lines, because that gives you a way to kind of focus your search. So the bullet after that around where I'm willing to live, so that's another perspective on this. What kinds of things are important in terms of the culture of the company, whether it's the work hours or the environment. Does it matter to you if the office furniture and the conference rooms and stuff are nice, or are you okay with places where that's not where they spend their money on other things? And then think about what is the job? What would you want to do all day? What would you be interested in? Who are the kinds of people you would want to work with? So for me personally, some of my considerations in terms of how I was thinking about this, I didn't really feel when I was in graduate school like I really fit in with academia. I like the research and exploring things, but there were a lot of people around me who liked going after kind of every last detail and really diving really, really, really deep into something. And that's not really me. I'm sort of a, let's get to the point where I've got an answer that's good enough to move on to the next thing. And then I also wanted to do something that had more of an immediate impact. I was doing basic science research at Fermilab, and it was interesting and cool, but there were only a few hundred people in the world that really cared about it. And I wanted to do something that had more of an impact on society. And then some other things I thought about were I really enjoyed working on teams. I like working with other people. I like spending time with other people, using other people as a soundboard and discussing things. So I wanted to make sure I worked with a team of people that I felt like I fit with. And some of the things I didn't care about. I didn't care about the dress code. It doesn't matter to me if I have to wear a suit every day. It doesn't matter to me if I have to wear jeans every day. I'm good either way. I didn't care if the offices were fancy. That doesn't bother me. So things like that were some of the things that I thought through. And actually, one of the things through the interviews that I did and then thinking about what I was interested in and what I liked actually led me to pursue a museum studies certificate. So the woman I mentioned who I interviewed who had worked at the Science Museum, that sounded like a really cool job to me, designing science exhibits for major science museums in the country. And so I actually pursued and got a museum studies certificate from Northwestern. So I actually was doing kind of other things, and again, that's something that's completely different from what I'm doing today, but it was one of the ways that I was trying to explore things and figure out what to do. All right, and then really trying to narrow that in and say, okay, what do I want to do? I was talking to other people who could help me in some way or another. So I found a mentor, and the service that I used was called MentorNet, and your university may or may not have a relationship with them, but there are lots of other places to go where you could find somebody who might be able to be a mentor to you and answer some questions. So things like I mentioned, talking to people on LinkedIn, either your own alumni services at your university, the directory on APS, things like that. And there's kind of a difference, I would say, between like the informational interviews where you're really just asking for like a half an hour of somebody's time to say, what was your job, what do you do, what do you like and dislike. And then mentor, the person I worked with at MentorNet, was a relationship over about a year period or so. And every few weeks to a month, we would kind of exchange emails, and I would ask questions about either the job search or their career path or things like that. And so that was more of a constant relationship over an extended period of time. Another thing that I did was to work with the career services at my university. And I mainly worked with the career services at Northwestern. And they didn't really know what to do with me at the beginning. They don't have a lot of experience working with physics PhDs. There's not a lot of us to begin with graduating from the university, and there's very, very few. I think I might have been the first person to kind of walk through their doors and say, hey, I need some help. So it took us a little while to get there, but we did end up building a relationship and getting to a point where we understood each other, and they could find ways to be helpful to me, which was great. So they have all sorts of career path information across all different industries and lots and lots and lots of stuff. They have Vault career guides, which if you're not familiar with, you might want to Google your university, and they have a subscription with them. Those are kind of in-depth career guides and have some really nice information in them. And then I talked to them about sort of the nuts and bolts of the job search around resumes and cover letters and how do you apply and where do things go and how do I tweak and do better next time. And then they also helped me. All right. Sorry, people, I'm going to have to give me 1 second. So they also helped me to connect to other alumni and with careers where they thought I might fit. So I talked to some people through them. So I actually met with a venture capitalist at one point that was connected to me through who was an alumni of Northwestern. Some very different roles that I never really considered and didn't know a lot about. And so they were able to connect me with some people there so I could do some additional informational interviews. And then later, I would say was where they were most helpful when I was actually going through the job, kind of the job offer process and negotiating an offer and things like that. They actually helped me figure out what were the appropriate salary ranges to provide. When you get asked, okay, what salary do you want? How do you answer that question? And they coached me through the whole job offer process, the negotiation process, things like that. Gave me some tips. So that was extraordinarily helpful. Let's see what else. And I would say through this whole process, there are some things that I really learned and kind of learned a little bit the hard way. So most people don't really understand what having a physics PhD means. They don't know what skills those are or what it is you might be able to do for them. And so you need to be the one who helps them create that understanding. So it's really on you to figure out how to describe and communicate your skills in a way that will make an employer understand how that might be valuable to them. It's not just enough to have a PhD on a resume. Nobody knows what that means or why that would be helpful to them. And then I also, through this whole process of exploring different careers and looking up information and things like that, I learned a lot of jargon, which was helpful because physicists have a very specific way of speaking about what they do and how they do things. I'll give you a silly example. So, in graduate school, we called a bell curve a Gaussian distribution. In my world, nobody calls it that. Everybody calls it a normal distribution. So it's just something simple, but it took a long time for me to kind of build some of that knowledge of I needed to be using different words. And that the better I got at that, the easier and faster I could get to a point where somebody could understand how I might be a fit for their company. So that's something that I think takes a while to do, and the sooner you can do it, better. All right, some other things. So in terms of, all right, so now I've got some sense of what I want to do. I've talked to some people, all that great stuff, so now I have to actually go find a job. So I did that in a number of different ways. I used different career fairs, at my university, ones across the city of Chicago. Oftentimes the representatives that are sent from companies are either from HR or from the recruiting area of the company, so they're non-technical people. And that was actually a good thing in many ways because it was, again, good practice for me to articulate to them what I was interested in, how I thought I might be able to help, what parts of their company I thought I might be a good fit for, and then they could take my resume back and try to connect me to somebody in that area of the company. Job boards is another one. Lots of different job boards, and there's all different job boards for different industries. So exploring those and learning what some of the key ones were. And again, just kind of reading job descriptions and seeing what was out there helped me understand what I was interested in, what might or might not be a good fit, and then also, again, understand the jargon, as well as what the companies were looking for. How did they describe the job and the skills and expertise they needed for that role, and how might that help me better articulate my skills and my value through my resume and through a cover letter and things like that. And then networking, and this is one that I kind of wish I had started sooner, and I have found throughout my career to be extraordinarily helpful. I talked to anybody I knew. I was, again, trying to figure out what industry I wanted to work in and what I wanted to do. And so I talked to anybody and everybody who I thought might know someone, again, to get an informational interview. So I was never really networking to ask for jobs, but more to say, I'm interested in this field. Do you know anybody? Or just, I think you know so-and-so. Do you think you could introduce me to them? And I could spend a few minutes just asking them about what they do. And again, my network was very narrow. So it was mostly my family and friends and then other physicists. But that's what I had to work with, so I did the best I could. And then actually finding a job. So lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of applying to jobs. It's very hard. It's really a full-time job in itself is to find a job. It requires a lot of focus and discipline, so I really tried to make myself spend time every day on my job search in a way that was effective. It's really easy to spend a lot of time on job boards and feel like you are doing something, but then, kind of 3 hours go by and all you've been doing is kind of clicking through job descriptions. So you need to think about how do you stay focused on doing things every day that will actually help you move forward in the job search. And it can be extremely frustrating, overwhelming at times. It's hard, but you got to do it. And then I also tried to, as best I could, and when I could, to ask people for feedback when I did get an interview or when I did get a phone call or things like that. And that's something I have found throughout my career. I think I had underestimated how much recruiters can be a really great resource. And I continue to reach out to them when I'm thinking about how, my next career move and things like that. They can be really, really great people because they see all the resumes, they see all the candidates coming in, and they've got a pretty good perspective on what works and what doesn't and what people are looking for. And then I think it's important to just keep tweaking and trying again, trying to keep improving, come at it a different way, try to tweak the way you're wording something or how you're communicating a piece. So just to give you some sense of scale, my job search was around 6 months or so between the time I really kind of dedicated good time to it and when I had a job offer in hand that I accepted. Across that 6 months, I applied to about 300 jobs, attended about a dozen job fairs. Out of that, I had only 6 interviews and 2 offers. So to give you some sense of scale of how much you have to do and get out there. And maybe that's just me. Maybe lots of you are far luckier than I am, in which case, thumbs up to you. And again, so all of that work, again, was good practice explaining to people why I would be a good fit for them. And so the better I got at it, the more successful I became in my job search. So how I actually got my first job. The networking is really what happened. And I feel kind of odd describing this because I do think it's important to do all the other things of job fairs and applying for jobs and things like that. But this is what happened to me. So a friend of mine I've known my whole life knew I was looking for a job, and we were at a party and talking, and she said, you know what, I know this guy, I think he did physics or math or something, I'm not sure. He does something mathy now. I don't know what it is, but I think maybe he's an actuary. I don't know, but he's really nice. You should go talk to him. So she clearly was not a technical person at all, couldn't tell me about what he was doing. But in any case, made the connection. So she introduced me to him. I talked to him. He did indeed have a physics background, so he could explain to me why his skills translated, what he liked, why the role was challenging, all of those things, and was working in a predictive modeling role at Travelers. And so at the end of the informational interview, he said, well, we're hiring. Would you be interested? So that led me to apply for the job, which led to 3 interviews, a phone interview and then 2 different in-person interviews, and then finally the offer, the negotiations, and then the accepted offer and the job itself. So the point of this is that you just never know where that connection is going to come from. So it could be anybody you know or somebody you meet. So just keep yourself open to possibilities. There's no way I ever would have envisioned that this friend of mine would connect me to my job. And there's no way, I didn't know jobs like mine existed. This wasn't an area, insurance wasn't something I'd been looking at, I wasn't aware of. There's no way I would have found this job on my own. So it just so happened to work out this way. All right, so once you've got the job, now what? Things don't stop. I think it's really important once you start in the role to continue to learn. You're moving into a new industry. There's going to be tons that's new, everything from the day-to-day work to the culture, to the environment, to the people. So try to absorb as much as you can and ask lots and lots and lots of questions all of the time. And it's especially important when you're new because everyone knows you're new and nobody expects you to know everything. And you can ask anything and nobody's going to be, look sideways at you. And some of the things I would say to think about are to spend some time trying to understand how the company works. What are the real problems and key issues for that company? And how does the work you're doing help solve some of those problems and understanding that connection? Because then your work also feels more valuable and I think is more fulfilling when you understand how it connects to the goals of the company. And then again, keep networking. So learn about the company, the structure, the different functions. How do they operate? How do they work together? What are some of the key areas that you're going to be working with and who might you need to know? Who are the influential people? Things like that. And then early on, I would say to try to make sure that you're finding ways to contribute early in the role. People hired you because they believe you can do the job and you're going to be successful. So finding ways to leverage the skills and experience you have had, even if it's very, very different from the job, but find a way to translate that into actual, true, real contributions to the organization. And then that shows people you're really trying to leverage your experience and help move the company forward, and that's what they hired you for. So in terms of, I just wanted to end with kind of some of the things I've learned now that I've been on the other side of the table of being the one doing the interviewing. I would say overwhelmingly my biggest piece of advice is to help the interviewer understand how you and your skills and experience relate to the job, will help solve the problems of the company, will contribute to the organization. There are lots and lots of people I've talked to who don't start with that, and it takes me a while to, I can sometimes spend half the interview trying to understand their skills and how they might fit. It's far better if somebody comes in and says, this is what I do, and this is what I'm good at, and this is the way in which I think that translates to what you're trying to do. The other thing I would say is to definitely ask the interviewers questions yourself about the job, the team, the work, things like that. You want to make sure that you're a good fit for the company, that it's a place you want to be, that those are people you want to spend time around every day. And then, as I mentioned before, getting feedback from recruiters can be really helpful, and they're often open to doing that. Not a lot of people ask them, but it's something I would suggest doing. And then again, that iteration of learn from the experiences and then keep adjusting and trying, trying again. And so in terms of like culture and fit, it's again that asking questions, taking a look at the company. Can you see yourself spending a third of your life there and with those people? And you can look for specifics, things like the office layout, things like do people keep their office doors open? That tells you if the company culture is a little bit more open or more closed. And is that something you're okay with? And then, on the networking and giving back piece, I think it's really important to keep building your network and maintaining your network. So I still talk to people that I knew in graduate school. I talk to people from my old job. And for me, it's not about what I can get from them as much as it is I get something out of the relationship just as a relationship. And then oftentimes other things happen because of it. And then, giving back is something that's important to me. So I'm giving this webinar today because I want to be helping the people that are in graduate school now who are going through what I went through, and hopefully that this helps them a little bit, that there's another resource, another person to ask. So to me, this kind of stuff is really important. So I'll just mention that if you want to get a hold of me, you can. I'd be more than happy to answer questions, afterwards, or if you're not looking for a job now, but you might be a year from now and you want to come back and reach out to me, I'd be more than happy to. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can also reach me. My email address is megan.anzelc@gmail.com. And I know Crystal has my contact information as well, so you can always contact APS afterwards, and I'm sure they'd be happy to connect me to you. So with that, I'll end and turn it over to you guys for your questions.
Great, Megan. Thank you for the very informative presentation. We've had a lot of questions come in as you've been talking, and maybe we can get to some of those while we have time. You talked a little bit about why you chose not to go into academia. It sometimes feels in physics that we're being bred only for academic jobs. So a couple of questions that arose are, how do you make yourself a more appealing candidate? How do you, are there certain courses or things that you can do to perhaps make yourself more appealing to an industry job? And was your advisor supportive during that process?
Okay, so I'll start with the last one first and then work my way backwards. So in terms of the support of my advisor, so I was very lucky. I had an advisor who was supportive. He was, to be honest, I think he was a little bit disappointed. He had, he had hoped that I would stay with academia, but he wasn't in any way going to get in my way or anything like that, and he was supportive. And I remember having a conversation with him, and he said, I'd really like to help you, but I don't know how, because I only know other people in academia. So it was, obviously meant a lot to me that he wanted to help. So I was very lucky. I didn't have the same struggle that I know some other people have of an advisor who is not supportive of trying to leave academia. Sure. And then in terms of sort of how to prepare and how to make yourself a more attractive candidate. So I would say a lot of the things that I talked about. I think the most important thing is to learn how to articulate what you offer and how that is going to help the company that you are applying to. What is it that you're going to do if they hire you that is going to help improve their team, get them better results, improve their processes, bring more advanced statistical knowledge or data knowledge or something? What is it that about you that is going to bring value to their organization? Why should they hire you? Above and beyond that is the most important thing. And I think for me it was hard. It took me a long time to learn how to describe that and to understand what people were looking for. But I would say that's the most important thing.
As you talk about that, it makes you, many people wonder whether getting a PhD is dare I say, a waste of time for an industry job, or is doing a postdoc a waste of time, I guess, after that, but even before that, is a PhD necessary for an industry job?
I think, so I would say it depends on what you're going to do. There's a lot of, so we have a number of PhDs on the team that I work on. We look at hiring a lot of PhDs. So it's a credential that's valued for us, and we have PhDs from math, engineering. We have somebody that worked in chemistry. We've got pretty wide range of quantitative background, statistics. But it depends on the job and the industry. There's a lot of places that you really only need a master's for. I had looked at a lot of the federal government jobs when I was looking for things, and there's a lot of the federal departments that are most of their job openings and most of their research positions are more at the master's level. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for and what you're trying to do. And I would also say that's very much a personal choice. I'm glad I did it. I don't regret it. I would do it the same way again. But I can completely understand somebody that doesn't. And there were and still are sometimes definitely days when I say the smarter people were the people that got out.
Sure.
And that didn't go through.
Well, you do mention. Sorry, you did mention that you started looking, for a job like 6 months out since you did decide to do a PhD, and a lot of people are asking, sort of, is that the right time frame? Is a few months out better, or should you start looking a year out? And what do you feel is sort of the optimal lead time for a job search in industry?
Yeah, so I guess I should clarify a little bit. So the work I was doing to try to do informational interviews and explore what was out there, that I started years before. I think more than 2 and somewhere probably closer to 3 years before I graduated. Basically, once I finished with my classwork, I started thinking about it. In terms of the real job search of like, here's my resume that I'm going to build, and here's the job boards I'm going to look at and apply for positions, that's the part that was like the 6 months. I would say there is a recruiting season. There's an awful lot of the job fairs and things that happen in the fall. And so I would take a look at, pay attention to what's going on in the communities in which you're interested in or the community you live in and the kinds of fairs and things that are happening. An awful lot of the university recruiting of bachelor's and master's and people who are going to be graduating starts in the fall because they do a lot of the recruiting at the job fairs in the fall and then do the interviews and the application process and the offers over the spring semester. And then that way, it works for the companies because they've got new hires they know are going to start, in May and June. And for the students, then, the process kind of works through that whole last school year. So I would also say for me, it was, it also had to do with how I could balance everything. So I defended in April of that year, and I think I had started my job search in earnest a couple months before that, but it was really hard to do both at the same time. So I kind of had to switch back and forth. And preparing for a defense and getting your dissertation written is, that's a very time-consuming and all-encompassing thing. So I think you have to make the choice that's best for you. I guess I would say I don't know if I would do it differently. I don't have a good enough sense of how long it typically takes. I just know my own experience. But to me, until you actually have a job offer in hand that you've accepted, you have to keep looking. So it sort of depends on your own comfort level. And I would say to your situation of once you're graduated and defended, does your funding end? And do you have other financial commitments, or kind of your own situation would certainly play into that.
You talked a little bit about selling specific skills to the recruiters that you speak with, or to the job interviewers that you talk to, and some people are curious as to sort of what skills do you feel like you sold to the insurance company? What did you highlight in yourself and in your training? Was it mostly programming? And if it was programming, what languages are important to learn, or was it something else?
So for me personally, it was the strong technical background I had, but also the strong communication abilities. So the ability to explain very technical concepts to non-technical audiences, the ability to work with people who were non-technical in a way that was productive and where both sides feel like they're able to contribute. So that was something that I kind of played up, and I still do to this day. I think that's that balance of those two is kind of one of my strongest traits. In terms of some of the specifics, I had a lot of C++ programming and a couple other languages, and the programming language that was being used by the team that I first started with was mainly SAS. And when I went through the interview process and we talked to them about that, but they weren't concerned that I didn't know the specific language. They more wanted to test me on, did I know a language? Because I think the thinking of a lot of the people on the team was, if you know at least one language, it'll be easier for you to pick up your next one. So it was more about, can you learn it and can you learn quickly? Those were the things that I was getting probed on during interviews around. And that's what I look for today in candidates, is do I think you have the ability to learn and get up to speed in a time frame that I think is reasonable? I care less if you know the specific skills. I care less if you know exactly, things about commercial insurance specifically, again, depending upon the role in the candidate. But my concern is more, do I believe you can learn and learn quickly?
I think you mentioned that you contacted, say, 300 interviews or sent out 300 resumes or something quite a lot over above the amount of jobs you accepted, I suppose. When you did follow up with these recruiters and jobs, did you mostly do it by email, by phone, or what was the best way you found to follow up and get sort of useful feedback from these people?
So I would say, I think I filled out about 300 job applications, and a lot of those I never heard anything ever again, the overwhelming majority. And the ones where I had some kind of interaction or where there was at least a phone call or things like that, and again, there weren't many of them. There were half a dozen or so. That's where I tried, if I could, to get some information from the recruiter or the hiring manager after the fact. And it kind of depended on the situation and if I thought they'd be open to that, and then whatever contact information I had. So oftentimes I had the contact information, the email address or the phone number of the recruiter, but not necessarily the hiring manager. So I might have emailed the recruiter and said, I understand you guys aren't interested in pursuing me as a candidate. I'm just curious. I'd like your feedback on how the interview went. Was there anything I could have done differently or better? Or if you could help me understand why I'm not a fit for the role, that would be helpful to me. So that was kind of how I approached it.
When you got these, when you finally did start getting into these different corporations, I guess you talked a little bit about some of the culture shift that you experienced as different from your experience in grad school, I suppose. What was What was most different or difficult to adapt to when you moved into the corporate world? Is there a good way to make that transition easier, or is there? Did you find it very different?
There were parts that were very, very different and parts that were eerily similar. In terms of the actual day-to-day work, I was almost shocked to find that it was almost identical to what I was doing in graduate school. We were working with very large sets of data where we had to do a lot of data preparation and cleaning. I was spending a lot of time programming. We were trying to solve really complicated problems where nobody knew what the right answer was. I mean, essentially what we're doing in insurance, pricing insurance, we're trying to predict the future. So very complicated problems, and in working with teams of different people. That was very, very similar to what I had been doing in graduate school at Fermilab. In terms of some of the things, the big difference there was just the data was different. It was insurance data, not physics data, but a lot of the day-to-day was very, very much the same. In terms of the things that were very different, I would say, one of the biggest adjustments is probably, you're working for a company, and that company's goal at the end of the day is to make money. And so what they're doing, what's important, what's viewed as helpful, real results and helping solve problems are things that help the company achieve its goals in terms of profitability or growth or both. So that's a definite shift. And so there's a lot of things in companies that come out of that. So for example, I had mentioned at the beginning that I didn't feel like I fit in academia because I wasn't always interested in understanding every last detail or diving really, really deep into something. So I actually fit much better in the corporate world because here we don't have the time or the resources or the money to spend all of that time and resource on understanding every last thing. We have to get to the point where we're comfortable that we have enough information or we understand things well enough to move on to the next problem, and then we do. And for me, that's a better, that fits my personality better and what I like better. But that's just me. But that can be a very rough transition for other people. I've seen some other people kind of struggle with that.
Well, in that line, I guess a lot of people would like to know sort of what is the average day like. I guess we all sort of know what it's like in graduate school, and you say some things are very similar. Could you kind of describe your sort of typical day and what you feel like is important to like doing if you're going to go into industry?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll answer it in two ways. One, what a typical day was like when I started right out of graduate school, and then what a typical day like is for me now, which is very different. So when I started, I was in an analyst role, and as I mentioned, I was spending most of my time programming, working with our different data sets, trying to manipulate the data, running and building statistical models off of the data, looking at output, trying to understand, kind of that whole iterative process of an analysis, and then figuring out how to summarize what we were finding and share that with other people on the team, other teams within the company, things like that, how to aggregate the information and summarize it and then share with audiences, either technical audiences or non-technical audiences. So in that way, it was very similar to the work I had been doing at Fermilab, where it was a lot of programming and data manipulation and trying to learn more about what the patterns were in the data, and then again figuring out how to share that information with other people. So those two were very, very similar. And then, like I said, some of the aspects of the company culture made things a little bit different. Most companies have like an annual review process where you and your boss sit down and talk about how you did over the past year, or maybe even a 6-month period, things like that. Formal structure around that process and things like how you get evaluated for raises and bonuses and promotions and things like that. There's more structure. And generally, and again, kind of depends on the company, but they do all have some amount of bureaucracy. So there's a little bit more structure to them, sometimes a little bit more formality. I work in insurance, which is an extremely conservative industry, so that influences kind of our culture and how we do things.
And is it a 40-hour a week kind of job, or is it you end up being there 100 hours a week, or how do you feel that the time breaks down?
Yeah, that's a great
relative
question.
To your expectations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, it kind of depends on the role and the department and things like that. Generally, when I started the first couple of years, I was working pretty standard 40-hour weeks. The work I was doing at the time it was very project-based, so you did have kind of crunches of time where something was due on the project and people were putting in more hours. One of the things that struck me as being very different was that my bosses or some of the other people on the team might be up at night working and sending emails and things like that, but I was not expected to reply to them, which was very different for me than what things had been like in grad school. So I wasn't expected to be online and working all of the time or every evening or every weekend or things like that. There were times and periods where I was expected to kind of meet deadlines and pitch in with the rest of the team. But generally, it was kind of the structured business hours, the 40-ish, 45, something like that. So.
Well, I guess part of the reason why we have unprecedented attendance in this webinar is, despite your personal popularity, maybe because it's about money. So there are a lot of questions about money, and maybe the first one is, people want to know kind of what salary ranges maybe we can expect in and out of academia. So when you hire someone, for example, do you expect them to negotiate with you? What are the sort of typical salary ranges that you're expecting to fill, and how does that work out?
Okay, good questions. All right, so I will preface this by saying The role that I'm in now, I help with the interviewing and hiring process, and I have some amount of say in who we hire, especially if they're going to work directly for me. At this point in my career, I don't yet have responsibility for determining salary. So I am not part of that part of the job offer negotiation. So I'll just preface by saying that. In terms of kind of salary ranges and things like that and what to expect, there's lots of information out there and you should go look at it. AIP keeps some statistics on that in terms of what kinds of jobs do people go into right out of grad school or from a postdoc and what kinds of salaries are they getting. There's all sorts of salary surveys. KDD keeps KDD Nuggets, which is like a data mining newsletter. They do a poll once a year on salary ranges that people have. Sites like salary.com, payscale.com, some of those places are good for kind of investigating some of that in terms of your level of education and experience and the job description, what's kind of the bell curve of salaries. And then, like I said at the beginning, I was using Northwestern's career services to help me understand what a reasonable range was and what I should be negotiating towards. And then, Eric, I think you asked about typical salaries across different places, at least what I found. So the federal government publishes all of their salaries, I think like down to the dollar, for all of their pay bands for all of their jobs. So that's out there. That's public information. And generally, private industry pays better than government. So that gives you some sense. And then I think there was like another part to your question, Eric.
Well, maybe the question is, do you just take the first offer? Do you end up negotiating it? Do you get a lawyer to help you negotiate it, or how does that process work? I mean, anything coming out of grad school sounds like a lot of money. And
it does, yeah. And this is, I remember somebody saying to me, this is probably the only opportunity in your life where you can quadruple or quintuple your salary from one job to the next.
Right.
So it's a big deal. And so for me, I negotiated, and that's partially my personality, partially I knew that there is a natural tendency, again, kind of broad brush statement, but women tend to negotiate less than men. So they tend to have starting salaries that are a little bit lower than men, partially because they don't negotiate for them. So I was aware of some of that and was trying to combat that myself. I didn't want to put myself at a disadvantage because I didn't want to negotiate or was uncomfortable doing it. So I did it because I wanted to do it. Other people I know don't, and some of it comes down to what you're okay with. I actually had somebody tell me after the fact I was one of the first people to that team to negotiate, and some of the people were very impressed by that I kind of had the guts to say, yeah, that's great, but let's talk about what what more can we do? And I think you mentioned a lawyer. I've never done that. I've never had kind of outside help other than, like I said, career services and things like that, using other resources to help me understand what the right range is. So I've never gone that route.
You mentioned your experience specifically as a woman in this process and how that contrasts. You've been involved in gender equality issues for a while. Have your experiences as a woman in a technical field been? Well, maybe you could talk about that.
Sure. So depending upon what you've been reading in the news, there's been lots of talk recent, especially it feels like over the last year or two, about women in the workforce and in the corporate world. Sheryl Sandberg, from the CEO of Facebook, and her book Lean In, and her TED Talk. Melissa Meyer from Yahoo, the CEO of Yahoo, and what's been going on with her. Meg Whitman, all of those. There's been lots and lots of talk about it. So that's fascinating reading if you haven't been taking a look at some of the articles coming out. So I would say, especially more in the heavier technical fields, but it's an issue in the corporate world in general that the higher you go, the fewer women there are. I think it's a very small fraction of Fortune 500 CEOs that are women. So it's a problem kind of everywhere. I think it's a little bit more of an issue in the more technical areas. Although there's quite a bit of variation by company and by industry and things like that. Some things I would say is that I mentioned before that there's a little bit more structure in corporations and their approaches to how they do things, and maybe a bit more formality, and that extends to some of this stuff as well. There's a lot of there are experiences I had in graduate school, and I actually had quite good experiences, so I'll just kind of level set there. But there were things people would say or ways people would act that would be absolutely not acceptable in a corporate culture. So it's just very different. But the issues are still there in terms of trying to make sure that the pipeline stays full with women, that we're recruiting and retaining and promoting women at the right rates and things like that, which is why I've continued to be involved in those kinds of conversations outside of grad school and in my corporate job.
You know, I have a surprising number of questions, and so I just have to ask that are along the lines of, you know, I went to graduate school, I'm kind of introverted rather than more extroverted, yep. and these job interviews sort of make me uncomfortable. Is there anything else besides, quote, being more extroverted that I can do to kind of be effective in an interview?
Good questions. So I would say, you know, people aren't interested in having you act or pretend to be somebody you're not, because that doesn't do you any good, and it doesn't do the people who are interviewing you any good. Because the goal is that both sides want to find a place where there's a good fit. You want to make sure you're finding a group that you want to be working with in an organization that you like and a job you like, where you're going to be happy and do work that you find fulfilling, and vice versa. The company wants to make sure they're hiring people that they think are a good fit for their culture. So I would say you don't want to be disingenuous. I would say some of this is all just, for me personally, was just practice. Interviews are just difficult experiences. They are sometimes awkward. They are not the most comfortable things to be doing, but they are part of the process. And so figuring out, you know, how do you get more comfortable? And for me, some of that's preparing a lot ahead of time. I try to play out, you know, the kinds of questions I think I'll get asked, and give my kind of rehearse myself of how would I answer that, what would I say, how would I make sure that I'm communicating, you know, my strengths or the things I really want to get across to the interviewer. So for me, some of how I feel better about it and get more comfortable with it is practice and preparation. Some of it, to be frank, is a little bit of fake it till you make it. You know, it just is. You know, some of this just is scary and nerve-wracking. I mean, you're looking for a job. It's going to be the thing that puts food on your table. That's a big deal. You know, so some of it's just, for me, is just trying to act a little bit more confident than I feel. And then normally I calm down after a while. My nerves go away, and I actually then feel as confident as I look.
I guess going back to before we get the job again, you may have talked about this briefly, but maybe you could reiterate. Did you feel like doing a postdoctoral fellowship after graduate school is, you know, is this harmful to eventually ending up in a job in academia? And maybe you could also talk about the transition back. If one decided to go to academia, is that then, in your experience, kind of end the possibility of going back to academia?
Yeah, good questions. So for me personally, I didn't want to do a postdoc. I'd been approached by a couple of people, and but I just wasn't interested. I knew I didn't want to stay in the field. So for me, it didn't make any sense, and it didn't feel right to take a job that I knew I wasn't really interested in, and was sort of going to be something that to me was, you know, I still wanted to do something else. I've definitely, you know, helped interview and hire people who had postdoc experience as well. So I wouldn't say it's something that detracts. It is something I think that, you know, making a big industry shift, there is a ton to learn. So that additional experience you get between the PhD and the postdoc doesn't really, from my perception and just a little bit that I've seen, doesn't add a whole lot to how you're perceived by an organization. It doesn't detract, but it doesn't add a whole lot. So it's sort of, I think, again, a personal choice of, is that something you really want to do, and are you going to get things out of it, or you know, or not? Do you want to look sooner? And then,
sorry to break in. Can I just interject one tiny little point, because I've wanted to sort of interject this to everybody. One thing that I've heard a lot from industrial employers is actually that having a lot of postdocs on your CV actually looks bad, because it gives them the impression that you have been holding out for an academic job and you're sort of taking the industry job as a consolation prize. I don't know.
That's a great point, Crystal. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, because I would completely agree with you. I do think on the flip side that multiple postdocs or too much time in academia And both the perception you mentioned, Crystal, as well as just people, I think, have a hard time seeing you being successful making the switch. There's sort of this, well, they've been doing this so long and they're so used to that way of doing things. Do I really feel confident they'll be able to make this significant cultural and industry shift? So yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah. You talked about networking, and I think you mentioned you actually got this job through a friend.
Yep.
You applied to a lot of other places. Do you feel like applications in general to places where you don't know anyone are or can be successful, even if maybe they weren't for you, or is that sort of a waste of time and you should pretty much solely work through your network?
So I've seen people hired who nobody at the organization knew, who came through because we posted a job online or on a job board somewhere, and they applied, and that's how they ended up getting hired. And I think for me personally, when I was going through the job search, it didn't feel right to not do it. It felt like to me that if because it did go on for a while, and some of it was hard and frustrating, but I felt like if I wasn't doing everything I could do to try to get a job, it just, I don't know, to me personally, it just didn't feel right. So I've seen both. I mean, me personally, I've never gotten a job just because I applied. I happen to have gotten this role that I'm in now as well because of a networking connection. But other people have. So I think it just depends. But I do think networking is important for all sorts of things, not just because it might open up potential relationships you wouldn't have had otherwise, or connections, or somewhere down the line something might come of something. But also because I think it helps. It at least greatly helped me understand what was out there in the context and helped me focus what I was interested in and what I wasn't interested in.
Yeah. Well, Megan, thanks for your time. It looks like we're out of time for the official webinar. We do have a whole bunch of questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, and Megan's kindly agreed to stick around for a few moments after for an additional question and answer period after Crystal makes some announcements. So thanks once again to our speaker for this informative discussion, and I'll hand things back over to Crystal.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric. Yes, we got amazing, wonderful questions coming in. As Eric said, this is all the time we have for the official webinar, but if you're able to stick around for a few more minutes, we will definitely continue the Q&A for a little bit. For those of you who are signing off now, we welcome you to follow up with speakers. You can send an email to me, webinars@aps.org, and I can forward your questions. Or we put Megan's email address. I sent it out to the group, and I'll send that again. Slides of this presentation, I believe, will they be made available? Megan, can we make them available? Okay. Yep. They'll be made available on the webinar page that you used to register for this event. You should also be directed to it when you leave the broadcast. Many of you ask about the recording. Yes, this is recorded, and it will be also made available on that same webinar page, but we do ask that you allow 24 hours for upload. You'll also receive a follow-up email from GoToWebinars containing a link to the recording of today's presentation. Lastly, in order to help us continue to develop quality webinar presentations, please take a moment as you leave to complete the short survey. Give us some feedback on our presentation. And that wraps up today's event. We hope you'll join us again next time. And so, Eric, I guess if you want to continue with the questions, I'll just hand things over to you.
That's very good. Are you still okay, Megan, for a few minutes?
Absolutely. More than happy to.
So maybe we could go back to the negotiation topic. It sounds like you spent some time thinking about that and preparing for it. And maybe I could ask how you negotiate a salary effectively. Do you use other offers as leverage? Do you threaten not to take the job? You've just been involved in a long search and finally found one possibility, and you'd hate to lose that, but you don't want to be sold short either. Maybe you could talk about how you negotiate kind of effectively.
Yeah, again, I think that's something that it has to fit the way that you personally do things and your approach to things. If you've got other job offers, absolutely, let them know. I would say let them know regardless of whether or not it's a salary conversation, because you want them to know that you do have an offer on the table, and that might change the timing around some things. So yeah, if you've got other numbers to share, absolutely. If you've got some sense of what else other people are getting paid for similar roles, hopefully you do walking into that conversation, use that information. So saying things like, I'm aware that the typical salary for a job like this is X in this area, or in between X and Y. You know, or it depends on the position you're in. You always want to negotiate, try to negotiate by having the other party be the first to give a number. And sometimes it works that way and sometimes it doesn't. So if it works that way, you can always say things like, I expect to be, when you're asked what salary you want or what you're looking for, you can give an answer like, I expect to be paid fairly given my expertise and the job description. You're sort of telling them you expect to be paid what other people are paid for the same kind of work. If you've got other industry data, as I mentioned, there's some other resources you can go to that have a lot of that kind of data. Taking it a little more extreme, like you said, Eric, threatening not to take the job, that's a personal decision. Yeah, you can definitely go that way if you want. It's I think you have to think through what are the consequences and are you okay with that? And if you are, then that's okay. Sure. I think some of it too is the approach kind of depends on the person. I've had some negotiations that were very almost, I would say enjoyable, where it was a good conversation, there was some back and forth, and we came to something that was agreed upon. Other negotiations I've had were a little bit more of playing hardball, and so that meant that I took a different approach then because they wanted to play hardball, so I said okay. So I tried to tweak my approach depending upon the person I was negotiating with and how they seemed to want to approach things.
When you're, maybe the job market is a volatile thing compared to when you were looking. How do you view it today as a potential place for people to go? Is it seem less friendly or perhaps more friendly?
Well, it's funny because at the time I wasn't paying enough attention to what was going on around me, for better or worse. Maybe for better. Maybe it was good that I was oblivious. But I graduated, I defended in April of 2008, and I started my new job in September of 2008. That was the crash. I think it was like the first day of work or the first week was when AIG fell and needed to be bailed out by the feds, which had huge implications for the insurance industry. And I was completely oblivious. I was like, who's AIG? I don't know, So I just didn't have an awareness. So I think my job search could have taken a lot longer, or maybe it was longer than it would have been otherwise. I don't really have a sense of that. And again, I think the job market today compared to then, I would say, is better. Generally, just because the whole financial industry is better and the economy is more stable. There's going to be definite variations between industries, though, right? Some industries are doing much better, and some are still struggling. Things like the construction industry are still turning around. So I think you're going to see different things depending upon where you're looking, and the city in which you're looking too, as well, because certainly the local economy comes into play.
Well, let me ask you this. Most of us don't have the maybe experience interviewing with multiple companies that our peers that have been in business since graduating from their undergraduate degrees have. Do you have any recommendations as to how to develop, cover letters that are unique for physicists or kind of oriented to our skill sets, and how to go about writing an effective resume? It seems that most suggestion websites are perhaps not tiered for the hard sciences necessarily.
Yeah, so I think this is where really understanding what the industry or company is looking for and the words they use to describe what they're looking for becomes really important. I had no idea. It took me a long time. When I started my job search, I didn't realize how much jargon I was using that was specific to high energy physics. And nobody else was using those words to describe things. So it took me a while to change the way I described even what I was doing in graduate school to somebody, so that I was using words that were more in line with the way that they were used to talking about things. It wasn't that both sides, both me and the other person weren't completely intelligent or articulate or anything like that. We were just using a different language to describe things. So I think the more you can learn about how the other party is used to communicating and how they talk about things, the better off you're going to be. And some of that, for me, was just kind of trial and error and learning over time. And some of it, like I said, I think is looking at how the job descriptions are worded and how the company talks about itself and things like that. And then I would say, too, to get other people to look at your resume. So resumes are going to be reviewed. It depends on the company and how you're sending your resume in, whether you know someone there or you're just going through the HR systems. the resumes are first going to be reviewed by someone in HR, so it's a non-technical audience. So someone else, my mom, should be able to take a look at my resume and understand, be able to read it and then say a couple of sentences about me that sound like what I do, or the skills that I have.
Do you find publications should be included, or do people not care?
So that I would say, yeah, I would say that too kind of varies by industry. There's going to be some places, and especially if you're going into more of like a real research environment where they do a lot of publishing. Some of the major companies kind of do have research arms that do a lot of publication. That might be different. For me and for the industry I work in, nobody cares. Yeah,
and again, if I can just kind of interject, based on a lot of the different career talks and sort of mentoring that I've done, and what I always tell students is that, and Peter Fisk talks about this. We did another webinar that kind of covers this as well in detail. But the job of the resume, the CV is there as a laundry list of everything you've ever done. The resume has one purpose and one purpose only, which is to get you an interview, and that basically means connecting the dots between the skills you have and the skills that they're looking for the job. And just like you said, Megan, going to these informational interviews gives you these sort of terms that you can put in to your resume, that will make it clear that you know that you have the right skills for the job. It'll get their attention. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Yeah, and resumes should be very short, right? 1 page or 2 pages, no more than 2 pages. They're different than CVs. They have a different structure and layout. And you have to think about it as like, how can I very, very quickly communicate why they should keep looking at my resume? Because they're just going to give it, whoever's looking at it isn't going to look at it very long. Job postings can get dozens, hundreds, thousands of applicants. So, they've got to cull through all of those resumes. So how do you make yours stand out? And part of that is figuring out a way to communicate effectively why they should keep looking at your resume. Why should they keep reading it?
You have mentioned, communicating well and effectively and in the right language several times. People don't necessarily speak the same sort of, as you mentioned, kind of use the same words to talk about the same things that maybe physicists do generally. How do you go about learning the quote industry language apart from trial and error, if we may piggyback off your experience?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot of it by trial and error, a lot through interviews where somebody would ask me a question and I would give an answer, and they would kind of ask the same question again but a little bit different. And that was a clue to me that I wasn't answering it in a way that connected to them. So trying to kind of keep mental notes of some of those experiences and then, reframe and try again. And like I said, some of it is taking a look at the job descriptions and how they're worded and how the company, the company's web page and how it describes itself. You can find there's all sorts of industry newsletters and publications and all sorts of information out there that's free. For all different types of industries that can help give you a sense of what are some of the topical issues, what are some of the big news items for that industry, what seems to be, themes over, in the newsletters over the last few months, so that kind of gives you a sense of what's really, really important. That'll help you see some of the language as well in terms of, how are they talking about the issue.
Maybe I can get one last question in. You did a lot of work, and maybe can provide some insight in sort of looking at all different types of avenues to get jobs. You went to many job fairs you mentioned, and all these resumes, and looked at a bunch of websites. Do you find that any particular type of, website or maybe some specific websites were kind of more interesting and more useful ultimately, or specific types of job fairs? Or if you were to narrow down that search now, knowing what you know, what would be the sort of best place to direct your efforts in looking for a job?
So like if I was looking for a job today, or if Sure. I was to redo my job search.
Well, redo back from when you were in grad school, I guess.
When I was in grad school.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do think the networking, because I just learned so much from doing that then helped me do all of those other things better. Because that you're getting some amount of feedback right away. You've got a conversation with a person where there's some back and forth. If you're applying to jobs through job boards, most of the time you're not getting any feedback at all. You don't even get a confirmation email that your resume was received, right? Much less anything from a human being that would give you any sense of whether or not, you were at the top of the pile or the bottom. So at least that was one of the ways where I felt like I was getting feedback on how I was doing and different ways to approach. And for me led to the job, but that's not always the case. For other people it's different. And networking can come in different ways. It doesn't all have to be in person or at networking fairs or things like that. I actually helped hire somebody who had posted a question on LinkedIn through one of the physics groups about trying to find a job in outside of academia. And I saw the posting and I wrote him back and we exchanged some emails and I had him said, hey, we're hiring, would you be interested, kind of thing. So it can come through all different ways. That was a network connection that happened for him, but because he had just asked a very broad question about, what kinds of ideas do people have about how to do this. So.
Sure. Well, Megan, thanks so much for all of your good advice and for helping us out. And I think that's going to wrap up our time. And I guess we'll sign off and say goodbye to everybody. And thank you one more time for all of your help.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I've had a lot of fun. This has been great.
Yes, thank you, Megan and Eric, both so much. It's been a really wonderful conversation. And again, people can follow up with emails. And thanks a lot for joining us. All right, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.